September 1st, 1943. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's hand paused over the intelligence report, his one good eye, the other lost to American gunners a year earlier, scanning words that made him laugh out loud in the humid operations tent. The Americans have produced a new fighter, heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it Hellcat. Our intelligence suggests it weighs twice our Zero, another American failure of design. Through the tent flaps he could see his squadron's A6M Zeros lined up on the pierced steel planking, sleek, nimble, deadly. For 2 years, these aircraft had dominated Pacific skies. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen before the Zero's guns. The Americans' latest attempt, this bloated Hellcat, would be no different. What Sakai didn't know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing knew, was that in exactly 30 days, this failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19.1, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would transform carrier warfare, break the back of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror had been built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had perfected. Yet within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant statistical certainty of death. The Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 wasn't arrogance. It was mathematics. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory, ratios that defied belief. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force eliminated in days. At the center of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When captured examples were tested by American engineers in 1942, they initially refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught. It seemed impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters like they build cars, heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through revolutionary design philosophy. Extra super duralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks added weight. Even the radio was often removed to save 30 pounds. Every ounce sacrificed for performance. The first reports of the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed like propaganda, or perhaps deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed 12,186 pounds loaded. The Zero weighed 5,800. Its wing area spanned 334 square feet with a draggy radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved in Japanese defense archives, was dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics seem to support his assessment. The Zero's wing, loading of 22 pounds per square foot, gave it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima, Japan's leading test pilot, evaluated captured P-40 and F-4F Wildcat fighters at the Naval Air Technical Arsenal. His report reinforced Japanese confidence. American fighters emphasize firepower and protection over maneuverability and range. This philosophy produces aircraft suited for defensive operations but inadequate for offensive campaigns. The Hellcat, being larger and heavier than previous designs, will prove even more vulnerable to our tactics. The industrial intelligence seemed equally encouraging. Japanese analysts calculated that building such a complex, heavy fighter would strain American production capacity. Each Hellcat required an estimated 40% more materials and 60% more manufacturing time than a Zero. Surely the Americans couldn't produce these monsters in significant numbers while fighting a two-ocean war. What Japanese intelligence failed to grasp was that the Hellcat represented not just a new aircraft, but an entirely different approach to aerial warfare. While Japanese designers pursued perfection through minimalism, American engineers achieved superiority through systematic overpowering of every performance parameter that mattered in actual combat. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine alone weighed more than a Zero's entire power plant installation, yet produced 2,000 horsepower, nearly double the Zero's output. This massive engine required cooling systems, fuel lines, and support structures that Japanese designers would have considered wasteful. But it also provided performance capabilities that made traditional dogfighting obsolete. At Grumman's Bethpage factory on Long Island, test pilot Robert Hall flew the first production F6F on June 26, 1942. His report to the Navy was cautiously optimistic. The aircraft lacks the nimble handling of foreign fighters, but compensates through raw power and climbing ability. Rate of climb exceeds 3,000 feet per minute, superior to any carrier fighter in service. The pilot enjoys excellent visibility and feels protected by substantial armor plating. But Hall's most significant observation concerned the aircraft's weapons system. 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, delivered a combined rate of fire exceeding 4,500 rounds per minute. Each gun carried 400 rounds, enough ammunition for extended combat that would exhaust a Zero's limited supply multiple times over. Japanese pilots, accustomed to fighters armed with 2 rifle-caliber machine guns and a single 20mm cannon carrying 60 rounds, couldn't comprehend the psychological impact of facing sustained heavy machine gun fire. The Hellcat's weapons created what American pilots called the buzzsaw, a continuous stream of half-inch projectiles that could saw through aircraft structure like industrial cutting tools. The first Hellcats reached Pacific theater squadrons in August 1943, just as Japanese intelligence was dismissing them as impractical failures. VF-5, embarked aboard USS Yorktown, received 12 F6F to supplement their war-weary F4F Wildcats. The squadron's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Charles Crommelin, was initially skeptical of the new fighter's combat potential. "The Hellcat feels like flying a freight train compared to the Wildcat," Crommelin noted in his squadron diary. "It's fast in a straight line and climbs like a homesick angel, but lacks the fighter instincts we've developed through hard experience. The Japanese will exploit our reduced maneuverability in turning combats." What Crommelin couldn't anticipate was that the Hellcat would make turning combats irrelevant. The aircraft's speed and climb rate, combined with radar-directed fighter control from carrier task forces, would allow American pilots to engage Japanese fighters on their own terms, diving from altitude, firing devastating bursts, then climbing away before Zeros could respond. The stage was set for the most dramatic reversal in aviation history. Japanese pilots who had dominated Pacific skies through superior aircraft and tactics were about to encounter an opponent that rendered their advantages meaningless. The Zero's reign of terror, built on 2 years of seemingly invincible performance, would end not through better dogfighting, but through the application of American industrial power and systematic tactical innovation. By September 1943, the laugh lines around Sakai's remaining eye would be replaced by grim understanding. The flying iron he had mocked would prove deadlier than any aircraft in aviation history, not through elegance or agility, but through overwhelming firepower delivered by pilots trained to exploit every advantage American technology could provide. The Japanese dismissal of American aircraft wasn't born from arrogance. It was earned through 2 years of aerial dominance so complete that Allied pilots feared encountering the distinctive silhouette of the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. From December 7, 1941 through mid-1943, Japanese naval aviation had achieved victory ratios that redefined the possible, establishing air superiority across an ocean spanning 8,000 miles with mathematical precision that awed military observers worldwide. The numbers told a story of systematic destruction that validated Japanese confidence. Over Pearl Harbor, 353 Japanese aircraft launched, 29 lost, 347 American aircraft destroyed, a kill ratio of 12.1 in Japan's favor. During the conquest of the Philippines, 192 Zero sorties, 7 aircraft lost, 107 American fighters destroyed, 15.1. The Dutch East Indies campaign, 89. Zero losses against 240 Allied aircraft eliminated, 2.7.11. Even accounting for ground losses, Japanese pilots were achieving aerial supremacy through tactical and technological advantages that seemed insurmountable. At the center of this dominance flew the A6M Zero, an aircraft so revolutionary that American engineers initially refused to believe captured performance data. Chief Petty Officer Kyoto Furuta, a veteran Zero pilot with 34 victories, described the aircraft's capabilities in his recovered flight diary. The Zero responds to the pilot's thoughts before conscious control inputs. Range exceeds 1,900 miles with external tanks, farther than most Allied bombers. Combat maneuverability surpasses any fighter in service. We own the sky wherever Zeros appear. The secret lay in designer Jiro Horikoshi's radical weight reduction philosophy. Every component was analyzed, refined, and minimized without compromising structural integrity. The result? An empty weight of 3,704 pounds compared to 5,238 pounds for the American F6F Wildcat. This 1,500-pound advantage translated directly into performance superiority across every parameter that mattered in air combat. Wing loading told the mathematical story. The Zero's 22 pounds per square foot enabled a turning radius of 612 feet at combat speeds. American fighters averaged 30 to 35 pounds per square foot, producing turning radii exceeding 800 feet. In dogfighting, where the tightest turn determined survival, Zero pilots could literally fly circles around Allied opponents. More devastating still was the Zero's climb rate, 3,100 feet per minute initially, degrading to 2,000 feet per minute at 20,000 feet, but still superior to any Allied fighter at altitude. Lieutenant Commander Shigeo Fukuda, operations officer for the 6th Air Group, documented tactical applications. We climb above enemy formations, selecting altitude and engagement angles. Allied fighters cannot follow us upward. We control every aspect of combat: when to engage, how to attack, when to disengage. The armament package, though light by later standards, proved devastatingly effective against Allied aircraft lacking armor protection. 2 7.7mm machine guns provided volume of fire for structural damage, while a single 20mm cannon delivered knockout punches that could destroy fighters with single hits. The cannon's 60-round capacity seemed limiting, but Japanese pilots trained to achieve victory through precision rather than volume. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's deadliest ace, perfected shooting techniques that maximize the Zero's firepower. His training manual, captured after the war, emphasized ammunition conservation. Fire only when victory is certain. One 20mm round placed correctly destroys any Allied fighter. The Zero's maneuverability allows perfect positioning for killing shots. Patient pilots achieve multiple victories per sortie. The range capabilities revolutionized carrier operations and land-based tactics. With external drop tanks, Zeros could escort bombers on 1,000-mile missions. Unprecedented endurance that allowed Japanese forces to project air power across the entire Pacific theater. Allied fighters, limited to 400 to 500-mile operational ranges, couldn't defend targets within Zero reach. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda demonstrated this strategic advantage during the Pearl Harbor planning phase. His calculations, preserved in Japanese naval archives, showed mathematical air superiority. Zero escorts can accompany bombers to targets 800 miles from carrier launch points. American fighters possess 300-mile defensive radius maximum. We can attack any target in the Pacific while remaining beyond Allied fighter range. The pilot training supporting these operations represented the world's most demanding flight program. Japanese naval pilots completed 3 years of instruction before entering combat, accumulating 500-700 flight hours plus specialized carrier landing practice. The curriculum emphasized aerobatics, gunnery, navigation, and spiritual preparation that produced pilots capable of extracting maximum performance from their aircraft. Chief Flight Instructor Masatake Okumiya documented the training philosophy at Kasumigara Naval Air Station. We create artists of aerial combat, not merely competent pilots. Each graduate understands his aircraft's capabilities perfectly and possesses the spiritual strength necessary for victory. American pilots demonstrate adequate technical skills but lack the philosophical preparation essential for sustained combat excellence. The psychological warfare value of zero dominance extended beyond tactical victories to encompass complete demoralization of Allied air forces. American pilots who survived zero encounters returned to their squadrons with reports that shattered confidence and tactical doctrine. The Zero seemed to violate laws of physics. How could any aircraft climb so fast, turn so tightly and fly so far? Major General Louis Brereton, commanding Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific, summarized the psychological impact in his February 1942 assessment. Zero encounters have destroyed pilot confidence across our fighter squadrons. Experienced pilots refuse combat when zeros appear. New pilots develop zero fever, physical symptoms of fear when entering areas of Japanese air activity. We face not just superior aircraft, but complete psychological dominance. The industrial capacity supporting zero production seemed adequate for Japanese strategic requirements. Mitsubishi's Nagoya plant produced 22 Zeros monthly by early 1942, while Nakajima's Koizumi facility added another 15 aircraft. With 37 new fighters entering service monthly, Japanese production exceeded combat losses by comfortable margins while maintaining quality, standards impossible in mass production. Jiro Horikoshi, the Zero's designer, supervised quality control that ensured every aircraft met exacting performance specifications. His production philosophy emphasized craftsmanship over quantity. Each Zero represents the pinnacle of Japanese engineering: hand-fitted components, precision-balanced control surfaces, engines tuned for maximum efficiency. We build aircraft worthy of our pilots' skills. The tactical innovations developed around Zero capabilities created combat doctrine that Allied forces couldn't counter. The Finger Four formation provided mutual support while exploiting individual aircraft maneuverability. High-speed slashing attacks utilized superior climb rate to escape retaliation. Energy management techniques conserved ammunition while maximizing combat effectiveness. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the Pearl Harbor attack, codified these tactics in training manuals that became doctrine throughout Japanese naval aviation. The Zero's advantages must be employed systematically. We engage only when conditions favor victory. Superior maneuverability allows perfect positioning. Superior range enables strategic surprise. Superior climbing ability provides escape routes. We fight when we choose, where we choose, how we choose. The electronic systems, though primitive by later standards, provided capabilities that Allied aircraft lacked entirely. Zero pilots used radio navigation aids for long-range missions, radio telephony for tactical coordination, and identification friend or foe transponders that prevented friendly fire incidents during complex operations. By mid-1943, Japanese Zero pilots had achieved ace status at rates unprecedented in aviation history. Nishizawa's 87 victories, Tetsuzo Iwamoto's 80 kills, and Shoichi Sugita's 70 confirmed destroyed aircraft represented individual achievements that Allied air forces couldn't match collectively. These pilots flew aircraft that amplified their skills while operating within tactical frameworks that maximized their advantages. The combat record spoke for itself. Over 10,000 Allied aircraft destroyed by Japanese naval aviation between December 1941 and June 1943, the majority falling to 0 fighters. Allied kill ratios averaged 3 to 4.1 in Japan's favor across all theaters, with some engagements achieving 10.1 ratios that seemed impossible by Western standards. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Japanese naval strategy, observed 0 operations with satisfaction during his April 1943 inspection tour. Our aircraft and pilots have achieved air superiority that exceeds our most optimistic projections. Allied forces cannot contest Japanese air power wherever Zeros operate. We have revolutionized carrier warfare through superior aircraft design and pilot training. What Yamamoto couldn't foresee was that American industry was preparing to counter Zero superiority not through better dogfighting aircraft, but through systematic application of industrial might that would overwhelm Japanese advantages through raw power, advanced technology, and production capacity that defied comprehension. The Zero's reign was about to end, not through tactical innovation, but through American determination to build victory rather than fly to it. August 31, 1943. 22,000 feet above Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them, 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded in his after-action report, B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they turned, and he saw the distinctive silhouette, single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. First encounter with F6F type fighter, he would write. Initial impression, Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber, engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to get on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve onto its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat didn't run. It didn't try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai's 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting to follow, watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for its weight, a hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, barely making it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao Sato, didn't return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on October 5, 1943, when Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. American carriers had been launching these hit-and-run attacks for months, usually fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time would be different. We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his diary. Below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage. Altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcat simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's armor included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds around the oil system, self-sealing tanks that could take dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon, climbing at full power to altitude, where the Zero's engine struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. "They came down on us like hawks on sparrows," Shiga wrote. "Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost." Lieutenant Commander Tameichi Hara, briefing pilots of the 204th Air Group on November 11, 1943, was one of the few pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Hara explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Using a combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy in slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Hara continued, "one high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, let them coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine." The technology gulf was becoming apparent. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, 4,500 rounds per minute total. Each 50 caliber bullet weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. The Zero's 7.7mm machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, 750 foot-pounds of energy. More disturbing were reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied on eyesight to spot enemies, Hellcat pilots were guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could see Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above, exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men, fighting those who could see in the dark." By January 1944, the Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program had been the world's most demanding. Training took 3 years, with pilots entering combat with 700 flight hours. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with 300 hours of flight time, Army pilots with 200. Fuel shortages meant most training was done in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with 300 hours minimum, including 50 hours in type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they were automatic, learned energy tactics in safety over Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumigaura Naval Air Station, wrote in his final report, "We are sending children to fight professionals. Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. We have no ammunition for practice. He had never flown at night. We have no fuel for such training. He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat." The industrial disparity was becoming mathematically impossible to overcome. While Japan struggled to produce 300 Zeros monthly by early 1944, Grumman's Bethpage factory was completing 12 Hellcats daily. The F6F production line operated 24 hours a day, with workers using precision tooling and interchangeable parts that allowed quality aircraft to be built at unprecedented speed. Each Hellcat required 85,000 individual components manufactured by 675 subcontractors across 23 states. Yet despite this complexity, American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, were assembling fighters with precision that exceeded Japanese handcrafted standards while maintaining production rates that Japanese industry couldn't comprehend. The ammunition production supporting these operations was equally staggering. Each Hellcat carried 1,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. With dozens of fighters flying daily missions, American ammunition consumption exceeded Japanese monthly production. Yet American munitions plants treated this as routine output. manufacturing cartridges to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Commander David McCampbell, leading VF-15 aboard USS Essex, witnessed the transformation firsthand during the February 17, 1944 raid on Truk. The Japanese still fly magnificently, but they're flying 1941 aircraft with 1941 tactics against 1944 technology. Our radar guides us to perfect intercept positions. Our engines give us altitude and speed advantages. Our guns deliver knockout punches that end fights in seconds. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese pilots was documented in captured diaries and interrogation reports. Zero pilots who had dominated Pacific skies for 2 years suddenly found themselves outclassed by aircraft they had initially dismissed as failures. The mathematical certainty of their superiority was being systematically destroyed by American engineering and industrial capacity. Warrant Officer Kunimitsu Jinzai, a veteran of Pearl Harbor with 16 victories, described the psychological transformation in his diary. "The Hellcat has changed everything. We can no longer assume victory based on aircraft performance. Their pilots arrive better trained than we are. Their aircraft are more powerful than ours. Their tactics exploit advantages we cannot counter. For the first time since this war began, I fear the outcome of aerial combat." The shock was spreading throughout Japanese naval aviation as pilots returned from missions with reports that contradicted 2 years of aerial supremacy. The F6F Hellcat, dismissed as American over-engineering, was proving superior to the Zero in every performance parameter that mattered in actual combat. The era of Japanese air dominance was ending, replaced by American technological superiority, backed by industrial capacity that Japan could never match. June 19, 1944. Philippine Sea. Admiral Saburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would prevail. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots, against them. Task Force 58 with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of them F6F Hellcats. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 08:30. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception with perfect positioning, altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, saw the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft in that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, got 6. "The Zeros tried to turn with us," McCampbell reported. "We simply refused. We'd make a high-side run, shoot one down, zoom, climb back to altitude. They'd try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off." By day's end, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses, 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the term turkey shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. The October 24, 1944, Battle of Leyte Gulf would see Commander McCampbell set his single mission record. Leading 7 Hellcats from Essex, he intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman Roy Rushing destroyed 6 more. "I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill," McCampbell recorded. "The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout, not a single hit on my aircraft despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. McCampbell's 2 ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. The psychological collapse following the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, wrote, The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible: the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots, no matter how skilled, were engaging not planes but a system. The pilot shortage became so acute that by early 1945, training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots, 60-70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40-50 hours total, approximately 7 days of training. During the Okinawa campaign from April to June 1945, the Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet. The Hellcat became not just a fighter, but a defender against the desperation of suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. "We developed what we called the mowing machine," Valencia explained. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. We'd make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against 249 losses, a 9.5.1 ratio. More significantly, they prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. By 1945, the technological gap had become unbridgeable. The F6F Hellcat incorporated improvements that made it even deadlier: water injection boosting power to 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, improved armor, and the K-14 computing gun sight that calculated deflection automatically. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 official victories, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his skill and experience, he was nearly killed in his first engagement. "I performed my best aerobatics," he wrote in his autobiography. "Loops, rolls, splits, every maneuver I had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat." The production figures told the story of inevitable defeat. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, lost 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieved a 19.3.1 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, and accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations represented the ultimate admission of Hellcat superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success is near zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission, led by Lieutenant Yukio Seiki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats in the process. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died as a passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast reached Atsugi Airfield. Captain Minoru Genda, who had dismissed the Hellcat as weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Around him sat the remnants of Japanese naval aviation, teenage pilots with 40 hours of flight time, aircraft cobbled together from spare parts, empty fuel tanks. That same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 2 p.m., the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. When the first American aircraft landed at Atsugi Airfield after the surrender, they were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vratsu, ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to Japanese pilots. His casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart left them speechless. "You have to understand," Vratsu told them through an interpreter, "this isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 Gs. I've never managed to break one." Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war discovered the true extent of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine contained 2,804 precision-machined parts, each interchangeable with any other R2800 engine. The Nakajima Sakai required hand-fitting of components. No 2 engines were exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was devastating. "We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age." Grumman's production of the Hellcat itself became a weapon. The Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months, a feat the Japanese couldn't comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone. September 2, 1945, USS Missouri, Tokyo Bay. As General MacArthur accepted Japan's formal surrender, overhead flew 450 carrier aircraft in a victory formation that included 200 F6F Hellcats, the same type of aircraft that Japanese pilots had dismissed as flying iron just 2 years earlier. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous ace, watched from the deck of a nearby destroyer as the formation passed overhead with mechanical precision. "We called them heavy and clumsy," Sakai would later write, "but they carried something we never understood, the weight of American industrial civilization." Each Hellcat represented not just one fighter, but the productive capacity of an entire continent dedicated to victory. The mathematical reality of Japan's defeat was written in production numbers that revealed the impossibility of opposing American industrial might. Final tally: 12,275 F6F Hellcats manufactured versus approximately 10,500 Zeros produced during the entire war. But these numbers only hinted at the technological and industrial superiority that Hellcat production represented. Each Hellcat required 85,000 individual components manufactured by 675 subcontractors across 23 states. The logistical coordination necessary to deliver these parts to Grumman's Bethpage factory demanded organizational capabilities that Japanese industry couldn't match. Zero production relied on hand-fitting components and artisanal techniques that limited output while compromising quality consistency. The human resources committed to Hellcat production dwarfed Japanese capabilities completely. Grumman employed 23,000 workers at peak production, while supplier companies utilized another 150,000 Americans manufacturing components. Combined Hellcat production employed more workers than Japan assigned to all aircraft manufacturing combined. Admiral Chester Nimitz, architect of Pacific naval strategy, observed the final Hellcat operations with satisfaction during his August 1945 inspection tour of Task Force 38. The F6F didn't just achieve air superiority, it made Japanese air power irrelevant. Our pilots could engage or ignore enemy aircraft at will. When 500 Hellcats launch from 15 carriers simultaneously, individual aircraft performance becomes meaningless. The technological innovations embedded in Hellcat design represented advances that Japanese engineering couldn't match even under peacetime conditions. The R2800 engine incorporated 2,804 precision-machined parts, operating in perfect synchronization to produce 2,000 horsepower reliably. The Nakajima Sakai, powering the Zero, required hand-fitting of major components and produced only 1,130 horsepower from engines that varied significantly between individual units. More significantly, Hellcat production standardization allowed component interchangeability that Japanese manufacturing never achieved. Any R2800 engine could be installed in any Hellcat airframe without modification. Propellers, armament systems, and electronic equipment swapped between aircraft without custom fitting. This standardization enabled field maintenance capabilities that kept American fighters operational under conditions that would have grounded Japanese aircraft permanently. The training pipeline supporting Hellcat operations demonstrated American systematic superiority in human resource development. By 1944, the United States was graduating 3,500 naval aviators monthly from training programs that exceeded Japanese peacetime standards. Each Hellcat pilot received 240 hours of flight instruction plus 50 hours in multi-engine aircraft before entering combat. Lieutenant Gerald O'Hare, arriving at Naes Oceana in March 1945 for F6F training, exemplified American preparation standards. We flew Hellcats daily for 6 weeks, practicing gunnery, formation flying, and carrier operations until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. My logbook showed 67 hours in type before my first combat mission. Most Japanese pilots we encountered had less total flight time than my F6F experience alone. The operational tempo achieved by Hellcat squadrons in 1944-45 demonstrated industrial warfare, capabilities that Japanese forces couldn't comprehend. Task Force 38 alone was launching 500-plus fighter sorties daily by war's end, maintaining operational rates that exceeded Japanese peak monthly output during their most successful periods. This tempo continued regardless of weather, enemy opposition, or aircraft losses, clear evidence of American industrial depth. The maintenance infrastructure supporting these operations required organizational capabilities that Japanese logistics couldn't match. Each carrier maintained parts inventories worth millions of dollars, spare engines for immediate replacement, and technical personnel trained to 150% of aircraft requirements. Japanese airfields operated with parts shortages, jury-rigged repairs, and maintenance crews, learning procedures through trial and error. The ammunition consumption alone would have paralyzed Japanese operations within weeks. Each Hellcat mission required 2,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. Daily operations consumed 1.2 million rounds of precision-manufactured ammunition that met quality standards, ensuring reliable operation at 40,000 feet in temperatures reaching 60 degrees C. Even more impressive was American fuel production supporting Hellcat operations. Each mission required 240 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel per aircraft. With 500-plus fighters flying daily, fuel consumption exceeded 120,000 gallons per day from carrier operations alone. Japanese fuel production peaked at 300,000 tons monthly, couldn't sustain American consumption rates for even a single task force. Captain Robert Winston, commanding VF-31 aboard USS Belleau Wood, flew 89 combat missions and witnessed the evolution of American air superiority. By 1945, we possessed technological advantages that made Japanese resistance futile. Our radar found them beyond visual range, our engines outclimbed them at any altitude, and our weapons systems destroyed them with mathematical certainty. They were fighting with 1941 technology against 1945 systems. The psychological impact on Japanese civilians and military personnel was documented extensively through captured diaries and post-war interviews. The sound of approaching Hellcat formations, distinctive R2800 engines audible from miles away, induced panic responses that Japanese morale officers couldn't counter. Unlike earlier air raids that targeted specific military installations, Hellcat operations demonstrated American capability to destroy any target anywhere in the Pacific Theater. Yoshiko Tanaka, A Tokyo factory worker whose diary survived the war captured civilian perception of American air superiority. The Hellcats fly over daily now, their engines making sounds like rolling thunder. They appear suddenly, strike precisely, then disappear beyond the horizon. This technological superiority terrifies us more than conventional bombing. It proves Americans can destroy anything they choose to target. The strategic impact extended beyond physical destruction to encompass complete disruption of Japanese war production. By early 1945, aircraft factories operated at 20% of rated capacity due to repeated Hellcat attacks. Transportation networks functioned sporadically as bridges and rail yards received precision strikes. Industrial facilities produced minimal output as workers fled to air raid shelters whenever American engines were heard. Emperor Hirohito himself referenced American air superiority in his surrender broadcast. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is indeed incalculable. Moreover, the general trends of the world have all turned against her interest. Under these circumstances, to continue the war would only result in the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation. But the new and most cruel weapon wasn't just the atomic bomb. It was the systematic application of American industrial power that made resistance mathematically impossible. Hellcat operations had demonstrated that Japan faced not individual aircraft, but an entire civilization dedicated to victory through technological superiority and unlimited production capacity. The final irony emerged through post-war analysis of Japanese pilot accounts. The same aviators who had mocked Hellcats as flying iron in 1943 developed profound respect for American engineering capabilities by 1945. Captured aircrew consistently rated the F6F as the most formidable opponent they encountered, not for individual performance characteristics, but for the unstoppable industrial system it represented. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai provided the definitive assessment during a 1962 symposium on Pacific War aviation. The Zero was a superior fighter in 1941. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system in 1945. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat had entered Pacific service carrying twice the weight of a Zero, powered by an engine Japanese industry couldn't build, armed with weapons they couldn't match, flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training, and produced in numbers they couldn't comprehend. Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness, but the strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By September 2, 1945, the laughter had turned to last letters home, the mockery to kamikaze missions, the confidence to complete collapse. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zero, it had destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare, proving that in modern combat, the nation that could build the better system would destroy the nation that could only build better warriors. The sky belonged to America, and the 12,275 F6F Hellcats scattered across Pacific airfields stood as monuments to industrial warfare's ultimate triumph over traditional military doctrine. Japanese pilots had laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh, it always did,